There are moments in life when everything seems to collapse at once. The foundations you thought were unshakable begin to crumble beneath your feet. Relationships fall apart, dreams dissolve, confidence shatters, and silence replaces certainty. In those seasons, it feels as though God has turned his face away, as if heaven itself has gone quiet. Yet, in truth, it is often within that silence that the deepest transformation begins. God's work is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is done in the dark, through pain, confusion, and surrender. The breaking you fear may actually be the process that builds you into the person you were created to become. To be crushed is not simply to suffer. It is to be stripped of the illusions that once defined your strength. We all enter life believing that power comes from control, confidence, and independence. But God, in his mysterious wisdom, does not use those who remain self-sufficient. He chooses the broken, the humbled, and the surrendered. Before he can shape a vessel for his purpose, he must first dismantle the old form that cannot carry the new. The crushing is not punishment, it is preparation. The clay must yield before it can be molded. The heart must be softened before it can be filled. In divine design, breaking always precedes becoming. Many resist this process because breaking feels like failure. When prayers go unanswered and doors close, we assume that God has abandoned us. But the truth is the opposite. God draws closest when he begins to refine us. He removes comfort not to destroy us, but to detach us from everything that blocks our growth. In his hands, pain becomes a tool of purification. The crushing of pride, ego, and self-reliance makes room for humility, obedience, and faith. Without that breaking, purpose remains trapped under the weight of self. Only when God dismantles what we built on our own strength can he begin the real construction of our calling. Look through the stories of every man or woman whom God used mightily, and you will see a common thread. Each was broken before being used. Moses was broken in the desert before leading Israel. Joseph was broken in a pit and prison before ruling Egypt. David was broken in exile before wearing the crown. Even Christ himself was broken on the cross before redeeming the world. The crushing is not a sign of God's absence. It is the mark of his preparation. He breaks only what he intends to rebuild stronger. The process hurts, but the purpose is holy. When life's weight feels unbearable, it is natural to question the point of it all. Why me? Why now? We ask, expecting quick answers. But God rarely explains the process while we are in it. His silence is not indifference, it is strategy. The potter does not ask permission from the clay before reshaping it. He knows the shape it must take. We see fragments, he sees the final form. And because his perspective stretches beyond time, his timing often conflicts with our expectations. What seems delayed to us is deliberate to him. The crushing continues until every unnecessary layer falls away, and the vessel becomes ready to hold his presence. Crushing seasons are sacred because they expose what comfort hides. When we are successful, we often mistake momentum for purpose. We assume God's blessing equals approval of our pace. But when he slows us down, it is usually to realign us. In moments of loss and stillness, distractions fade and truth surfaces. We see our dependence on others, our attachment to outcomes, and our fragile trust in control. God uses that clarity to rebuild our foundation on him alone. He loves us too deeply to let us remain untested. A faith that has never been crushed cannot carry the weight of calling. To be crafted by God means being redefined from within. It means letting go of the identities built on performance, recognition, and pride. The crushing exposes false strength, the image we show the world, and replaces it with genuine resilience that only surrender can birth. This is the paradox of faith. The weaker we become in ourselves, the stronger God's power becomes through us. Brokenness opens space for divine strength to flow unobstructed. In the end, the crushing is not about what is lost but about what is found, a clearer sense of who we are and whose we are. When you feel everything collapsing, remember, God never wastes pain. Every disappointment, every delay, every heartbreak carries divine purpose. The crushing is not chaos, it is choreography. Each event, no matter how painful, fits into a pattern of preparation. You are not being buried, you are being planted. Seeds break before they bloom, and gold melts before it shines. The same God who allows breaking is the one who promises restoration. But he restores differently. He does not rebuild the old, he creates something entirely new. In those quiet, lonely places where it feels like nothing is left, transformation begins invisibly. The world may see ruin, but heaven sees raw material. God crafts masterpieces out of what others call mistakes. He writes redemption into every scar and strength into every weakness. The crushing teaches endurance. Endurance builds character, and character makes you ready for destiny. The process is painful, but every ounce of suffering becomes the soil of future strength. God's greatest works are never rushed. They are refined through pressure, time, and grace. You might not understand it now, but one day you'll look back and see how the crushing was necessary. You'll realize that without it, your character would have been shallow, your purpose untested, your calling incomplete. God breaks not to destroy but to align your life with divine design. The very pain you once cursed becomes the proof that He was shaping you for something greater. You were never abandoned, you were being crafted. The crushing season, then, is an invitation to trust what you cannot yet see. It is the moment when faith must lead and understanding must follow. It demands surrender, the willingness to let go of your timeline, your plans, and your image of control. It requires believing that even when everything falls apart, God's hand still holds every piece. To the eye, it looks like destruction. To heaven, it looks like creation. The same God who allows the storm also commands the sunrise that follows it. Every soul destined for greatness must walk through breaking. There are no shortcuts around it. God cannot fill a vessel that is already full of self. So He empties it. He removes what was never meant to define you, status, validation, comfort, and replaces it with things that last, humility, patience, and wisdom. The crushing breaks your dependence on temporary things and teaches you to rely solely on eternal truth. It reveals that what is taken away is never greater than what is being prepared. And while you may not see the crafting yet, it has already begun. Every tear is counted, every loss recorded, every silence heard. God is not distant, He is deliberate. What you call breaking, He calls building. What you see as ending, He sees as beginning. The crushing is the sound of transformation. If this journey touched your heart, hit subscribe. Don't miss the next step of transformation. The moment of breaking is only the beginning. What follows is often even more challenging. The long, quiet stretch where God begins to rebuild what He has broken. It is not instant and it is not comfortable. Once the crushing has stripped away everything false, the divine process of crafting begins, layer by layer, lesson by lesson. This is the phase where faith must shift from theory to endurance. Here, trust is tested, patience is purified, and identity is redefined. The crafting process is where God turns the fragments of who you were into the foundation of who you are meant to become. When God starts to rebuild, He does not rush. The same hands that allowed the crushing now handle every piece with precision. Each fragment of your past, every disappointment, failure, and scar, is examined and repurposed. What others see as waste, God sees as material. He gathers what life shattered and begins shaping it according to His design. The process feels slow because true transformation takes time. Just as a potter cannot form clay without consistent pressure, God cannot shape a soul without seasons of waiting and stillness. The crushing humbles you, the crafting molds you. During this phase, God often hides you. While others move forward, your progress seems invisible. You may feel forgotten or overlooked, but that concealment is intentional. Before public purpose comes private preparation. God conceals what He values most until it's ready. Diamonds form in darkness, roots grow underground, and masterpieces are painted in silence. If He's hiding you, it's because He's building you in ways that noise cannot sustain. Hidden seasons protect you from pride, distraction, and premature exposure. You are not being delayed, you are being developed. In the crafting process, the lessons intensify. God begins confronting the inner areas you once ignored, your fears, doubts, motives, and attachments. It is not enough for Him to change your circumstances. He aims to change your nature. He teaches dependence by removing safety nets. He teaches faith by withholding explanations. He teaches humility by allowing misunderstanding. Every unanswered prayer, every delayed dream, every silent night becomes part of your spiritual education. The lessons hurt because they reach deep, but they also heal what pride once concealed. Through it all, God is crafting a heart that reflects His own. It is here that many people quit. The silence becomes unbearable, the progress too slow, the purpose too distant. But those who remain, those who trust God even when He seems absent, discover something sacred, a peace that no circumstance can shake. The crafting process is where faith matures from belief to intimacy. You no longer follow God only for blessings. You follow Him because you've learned He is the blessing. The relationship deepens not through answered prayers, but through unshakable trust. You realize that His no is often protection, His delay is direction, and His silence is strategy. When God crafts, He works with fire. Just as gold is refined by heat, character is purified by trial. Fire reveals what cannot stay. It burns away pretense and impurity, leaving only authenticity. In life's furnace, the false falls away, the pride that once spoke loudly, the opinions that once shaped decisions, the dependencies that once defined security. When God allows fire, it's not to destroy you but to distinguish you. The ones who endure it emerge stronger, clearer, and closer to Him. The same flames that once terrified you become proof that you can survive what once seemed impossible. As you are crafted, your definition of strength changes. You realize that true strength isn't loud or visible. It's quiet endurance, silent faith, and steady surrender. God's strongest people are not those who never break, but those who learn how to bend without losing trust. The crafting process teaches flexibility, it breaks rigidity and replaces it with resilience. You begin to understand that divine timing cannot be rushed and that what's built with God lasts longer than what's built without Him. Patience becomes your weapon and faith becomes your anchor. But crafting is not just about endurance, it's about alignment. God does not rebuild you into your old self, He aligns you with His original design. That means some dreams won't return, some people won't stay, and some doors won't reopen. The crafting forces you to release what you thought you needed to embrace what God knows you require. You cannot carry the weight of destiny with the same mindset that broke you. The process changes not just your circumstances but your capacity. What once drained you now disciplines you. What once discouraged you now drives you. In this phase you begin to see glimpses of why God allowed the crushing. Little by little the purpose emerges. You notice that what once hurt you now helps others. The experiences that once brought tears now bring wisdom. Pain becomes ministry, scars become testimony. You start to see that the crushing wasn't wasted, it was woven into your assignment. God crafts through contrast. He uses pain to reveal compassion, loss to teach gratitude, and failure to shape humility. The very things you prayed to escape become the tools He uses to equip you. It is here that you also begin to recognize your value. Not the value defined by status or recognition, but the quiet worth that comes from surviving what should have broken you. God's crafting reveals your strength by exposing what didn't destroy you. You realize you are not fragile, you are refined. You are not forsaken, you are focused. You are not lost, you are learning. Every scar becomes evidence of grace. The fire you endured becomes the light that guides others. This is the beauty of divine craftsmanship. What was once weakness becomes wisdom, and what was once pain becomes purpose. Through it all, God remains both the potter and the artist. He sees what you cannot. The clay never understands the potter's movements, yet it trusts the pressure. Likewise, you may not always grasp what God is doing, but your peace depends on trusting His hands. His shaping is not random. Every touch has intention. What He removes, He replaces. What He breaks, He restores. What He delays, He perfects. When God crafts, nothing is wasted, not the tears, not the waiting, not the pain. The divine process then is not about speed, it's about depth. God is not interested in temporary success. He's interested in eternal strength. He is not crafting you for comfort but for calling. That's why His process takes longer than you expect and costs more than you planned. But when it's done, you'll carry something priceless: authenticity. You will no longer need to prove your worth because you'll have lived through proof of His faithfulness. The crafting strips away everything false until only truth remains. Truth about who you are, who He is, and what He designed you to do. In time, you begin to see that the crushing and crafting are not two separate stages. They are one divine motion. The same pressure that broke you is the same power that builds you. The difference is perspective. When you stop fighting the process and start flowing with it, peace replaces panic. You stop asking why me, and start declaring use me. That shift marks the transition from breaking to becoming. You no longer see pain as punishment but as preparation. You no longer fear the process because you've learned the potter's character. Every pain shapes purpose. Subscribe now and be part of this divine journey. After the breaking and during the crafting comes the most misunderstood phase of all, the hidden season. It's that stretch of time where nothing seems to move, where prayers echo without reply, and where the promise of purpose feels impossibly far. Many people mistake this season for abandonment, but those who understand God's patterns recognize it as sacred. The hidden season is not a punishment, it is protection. It's where God refines you in silence before revealing you in purpose. What feels like delay is often God's deliberate design to ensure that your character can carry your calling. In every divine story there's a hidden chapter. Before David ruled Israel, he tended sheep in solitude. Before Joseph governed Egypt, he waited in prison. Before Moses led a nation, he wandered in obscurity. Even Jesus lived 30 years in quiet preparation before 3 years of public ministry. The hidden season is the furnace of formation, the place where potential is purified and endurance is etched into the soul. God does his finest work away from applause because he's not preparing you for attention. He's preparing you for assignment. When he hides you, he's protecting your purity, building your resilience, and sharpening your discernment. This season can feel suffocating because visibility has become the modern measure of value. The world equates exposure with importance, but God values depth over display. In his kingdom, greatness grows in secret. A seed must first die underground before it ever rises into light. The same principle applies to your spiritual growth. Before God elevates you, he buries you. It's not to destroy you but to ensure your roots go deep enough to sustain what's coming. If he were to reveal you too early, the weight of visibility would crush what the weight of anonymity was meant to strengthen. In the hidden season, God dismantles your dependency on recognition. You learn to perform not for people but for purpose. You begin to see that your worth was never tied to validation, applause, or approval. The silence becomes your teacher. You discover how to hear God's voice without external confirmation. You learn to move in obedience even when no one notices. This is where spiritual maturity takes root, in the quiet, uncelebrated acts of faithfulness. The unseen obedience of today becomes the unshakable authority of tomorrow. But silence can be painful. It challenges every human instinct for clarity. We crave reassurance, and when it doesn't come, doubt grows. Yet God often uses silence as his greatest test of trust. When heaven seems quiet, it's not because he's absent, it's because he's assessing your faith. Will you still believe when you can't hear? Will you still obey when you can't see? Trust isn't proven in revelation, it's proven in restraint. The hidden season demands endurance without evidence, faith without feedback, and love without visible reward. That's what separates the chosen from the called, those who can stand firm even when the light is gone. Many give up here, assuming that God has forgotten them. But those who remain in the silence begin to experience something extraordinary. The absence of noise amplifies the presence of God. You start to notice his whispers in places you overlooked before, in the stillness, in the waiting, in the small mercies of daily life. Your sensitivity sharpens, your spirit matures. What once felt like delay becomes dialogue. You realize that God was never quiet, he was speaking differently. He was teaching you to listen with your heart instead of your ears. The hidden season also exposes your motives. When the applause fades, what remains is your true intention. Are you serving for recognition or for relationship? Are you chasing calling or chasing validation? God hides you to purify your purpose. He wants your obedience to flow from love, not ambition. That's why the hidden season is both refining and revealing. It strips away every counterfeit motive until only authenticity remains. You learn to serve quietly, to give without being seen, to trust without being told. This is the soil in which humility grows, and humility is the foundation of divine usefulness. Sometimes the people around you won't understand your hiddenness. They'll assume you've lost your way because they can't see your progress. But divine preparation rarely looks impressive. You may not be producing visible results, but you're growing invisible roots. God is stretching your patience, testing your faith, and preparing your capacity. When he finally reveals you, it will look sudden to others but not to heaven. Public anointing always follows private obedience. The hidden season ensures that your rise is sustainable, not superficial. There is also a stripping that happens here. The hidden season takes away things that no longer align with your next chapter. Habits, relationships, mindsets, even opportunities. It's painful because it feels like loss, but it's actually divine alignment. God won't allow what's meant for your past to contaminate your future. The pruning is proof of progress. Every branch that bears fruit is trimmed so it can bear even more. In this season, God removes so that he can replace. He subtracts to multiply. And while it hurts, every cut is calculated. Waiting in the hidden season is one of faith's greatest challenges. It demands daily surrender, waking up each morning without visible change, yet choosing to believe that progress is happening beneath the surface. Waiting reveals what words can't, the depth of your trust. Those who endure waiting seasons emerge with a faith that is unshakable because it's been tested in silence. You learn to stop measuring God's presence by activity and start trusting his character. When everything seems still, that's when he's working most deeply. Over time, the silence becomes sacred. What once felt empty now feels intimate. You realize that being hidden with God is not isolation, it's incubation. He's growing something within you that can't be rushed. Like a sculptor perfecting unseen details, he's refining every part of your character. By the time he reveals you, the public version will simply reflect the private preparation. And when that moment comes, you'll understand why he hid you for so long, because the weight of your purpose required the depth of your roots. The hidden season transforms your perspective of success. You stop craving recognition and start craving revelation. You no longer seek to be seen, you seek to be sent. You begin to value God's approval above all else. The applause of men fades, but the affirmation of heaven remains. You understand that obscurity with God is better than prominence without Him. You become more interested in faithfulness than fame, more devoted to purpose than platform. In this shift, you finally find peace. You stop fighting the hiddenness and start thanking God for it, because you now see that every quiet day was a divine investment in your destiny. And then, subtly, something begins to shift. Not through noise or announcement, but through quiet confidence. You start to feel ready. The lessons of waiting, trusting, and surrendering begin to take root in action. You realize you've been transformed, not in a single moment, but through a series of unseen ones. God has crafted a heart that can now hold what He intends to pour. The hidden season has done its work. You are no longer the same person who entered it. You've been refined, redefined, and made ready for what's next. When everything goes silent, God begins to speak. Subscribe to hear what He's saying next. Every divine process leads to a moment of unveiling. After the crushing, the crafting, and the hiding, comes emergence, not as a sudden breakthrough, but as a quiet revelation of what God has been forming all along. You don't rise from your brokenness as the same person who was shattered. You emerge as someone new, someone deeper, wiser, and more aligned with heaven's design. The crushing stripped away your illusions, the crafting shaped your capacity, and the hidden season refined your heart. Now, in the light of all you've endured, purpose begins to make sense. The pain that once confused you now connects perfectly with the plan that defines you. Emergence is not about returning to where you were, it's about stepping into who you've become. God never restores you to your former state. He transforms you into a new creation entirely. The cracks in your life remain, but they no longer represent weakness. They become channels for His glory to shine through. What once felt like failure now functions as evidence of grace. You realize that your story, with all its broken chapters, carries power not in its perfection but in its redemption. The vessel may have been crushed, but in the potter's hands, it now carries a beauty born of both strength and surrender. This is the moment when you begin to walk in your purpose, not with pride but with peace. The same circumstances that once made you question God now confirm His presence. Every delay, every loss, every tear suddenly carries meaning. You see that the crushing wasn't random, it was required. Without it, you would never have discovered the depth of your dependence on Him. Without the crafting, you would never have learned how to carry the weight of your calling. Without the hidden season, you would never have learned to hear His voice in silence. Everything that once seemed senseless now reveals divine symmetry. Emergence is also marked by clarity. You begin to understand why certain doors never opened, why some people couldn't stay, and why some prayers went unanswered. God's no begins to sound like mercy. You see how His protection was hidden in His redirection. The things you thought were losses were actually layers of preparation. When you walk with God long enough, hindsight becomes holy. You realize that every heartbreak was a hinge turning you toward destiny. The pain was the chisel that carved your purpose. But emergence is not simply a personal victory, it's a commissioning. God does not restore you for comfort, He restores you for calling. Everything you've endured now becomes a tool for service. The strength forged in struggle becomes the compassion that heals others. Your scars become your sermon. The same place where you were crushed becomes the ground where others find hope. That's the divine irony of transformation. God never wastes a wound. He redeems every broken piece by using it to build someone else. What once brought tears now brings testimony. As you begin to walk in purpose, you carry a quiet confidence, not arrogance but assurance. You no longer strive to prove your worth, you simply embody it. You no longer need validation because you've already been vindicated by grace. The crushing taught you that approval from people fades, but identity in God remains. The crafting taught you that growth requires surrender. The hidden season taught you that purpose grows in silence. And now, as you emerge, you realize that all along, God was never distant. He was deeply involved in every detail. Emergence does not mean the end of pain. It means you now perceive it differently. You understand that trials will continue, but they no longer threaten your faith. You've seen God's faithfulness in the fire. You know He can be trusted in the storm. The difference now is perspective. Pain no longer defines you. It refines you. You no longer fear the breaking because you understand its purpose. You know that if God allows pressure, it's always producing something. That revelation gives you strength that the world cannot shake. With this new strength comes responsibility. Purpose is not given for pride, it's given for impact. God lifts you so you can lift others. The crushing gave you empathy, the crafting gave you endurance, the hidden season gave you wisdom. Now He calls you to use them. You become a living example of redemption, a reminder that brokenness is not the end, but the beginning of beauty. You speak differently, walk differently, love differently because you've experienced grace in its rawest form. You become proof that God can rebuild what life tried to ruin. And as you begin to serve in your calling, you notice something profound. The process never truly ends. There are smaller crushings, gentler craftings, and new seasons of hiddenness that continue to shape you. Because growth with God is continuous. He doesn't stop molding you once you reach purpose. He keeps refining you for greater assignments. The difference now is that you embrace the process rather than resist it. You've learned that every season, whether painful or peaceful, carries purpose. You've discovered that the same God who broke you still blesses you, and often both at once. Emergence brings perspective that suffering alone cannot teach. You start to thank God for what didn't happen, for what didn't work, for who didn't stay. You realize those were divine subtractions that made space for something greater. Gratitude replaces grief. Peace replaces panic. You stop needing to understand every detail because you trust the designer behind it all. You finally see that God's ways were never meant to make sense. They were meant to make you strong. You have become the living proof of Romans 8 verse 28. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. At this stage, your testimony begins to carry authority. Not because of eloquence but because of experience. People can argue with opinions but they can't argue with endurance. You've lived through what others only quote. You've seen God restore what was shattered and redeem what was wasted. Your voice now carries weight because it's built on truth tested by fire. The same crushing that once silenced you now empowers you to speak with conviction. You no longer preach theories, you share transformation. That is the mark of someone truly crafted by God. As you walk forward, you understand that being crafted by God is not about perfection, but about progression. The goal is not to live without struggle but to live with surrender. You've learned that the potter's hands never leave the clay, not even in the crushing. His grip may tighten, his pressure may increase, but his presence never departs. Every press, every pause, every plan was part of a greater purpose. You were never abandoned, you were being designed. Every scar is now a signature of his craftsmanship, proof that you've been in the potter's hands. And so, the story comes full circle. What began as breaking ends in becoming. What started in pain ends in peace. You realize that being crushed was never the curse you thought it was the call that shaped your destiny. You are no longer who you were before the storm. You are stronger, wiser, and more surrendered. The process didn't just change your situation, it changed your spirit. You were crushed, but you were also crafted, and in that divine tension lies the beauty of God's work. Because the truth is simple yet profound, God breaks the man He intends to use. He crushes the clay before He molds it, prunes the branch before it bears fruit, refines the gold before it shines. And every time the end result is worth the pain. You were never being destroyed, you were being designed. You were not being buried, you were being built. And now, as you stand on the other side of breaking, you can finally say with confidence, the crushing was the best thing that ever happened to me. For it was there, in the ruins, that God's masterpiece was born. This isn't just a story, it's a message of rebirth. Subscribe and rise with purpose.